She had everything a woman was supposed to want. The penthouse in Miami with floor-to-ceiling views of Biscayne Bay. The closet full of clothes she did not pick out herself. The jewelry that arrived in little boxes as apologies for late nights and missed dinners. The husband who bought a 72-foot yacht and named it after himself, not after her. Dominique had all of it, every last gleaming hollow piece of it. And standing on the sun-bleached dock of Marina Bay Harbor on a Tuesday morning in late July, watching two men load provisions onto her husband's boat, she felt the particular kind of emptiness that only comes to people who have everything. She was 34 years old. She was stunning in the way that women who have learned to weaponize their beauty become stunning. Dark skin that caught the Florida sun like polished mahogany. Eyes that did the work of a whole conversation before she ever opened her mouth. A white linen sundress that cost more than most people's rent. And moved around her like it was grateful to be there. She was also, if she was being honest with herself, bored out of her mind. Gerald Whitmore III had purchased the yacht the same way he purchased everything else in his life. Decisively, expensively, without consulting her. He had called her from a broker's office on a Wednesday, told her he was buying a boat, and asked if she wanted a white interior or cream. She had said cream. He had bought white. That was, in miniature, the entire story of their 3-year marriage. The yacht was called the Gerald III. Of course it was. She stood at the edge of the dock with a coffee she had stopped tasting 20 minutes ago, watching the morning light cut across the water in long, golden ribbons, and she told herself this trip would be different. Gerald had promised a 2-week cruise through the Bahamas. Just the two of them. Well, the two of them and whatever crew Gerald had hired, because Gerald did not actually know how to sail a 72-foot yacht. He just knew how to own one. That was when she saw them. Not one man. Two. They came around the stern of the Gerald III carrying a crate of provisions between them. And for a moment, Dominique thought she was seeing double. Same height, 6'1" at least. Same broad shoulders filling out the same navy crew shirts. Same sun-bleached blonde hair cut short on the sides, longer on top, pushed back from their faces with the casual certainty of men who had spent most of their lives outdoors. Same jaw, same nose, same easy way of moving through space like the world had been arranged specifically for their convenience. Twins. Identical in every way she could see from the dock. The one on the left noticed her first. He set his end of the crate down on the deck, straightened up, and looked at her across the 60 feet of water and dock between them. He did not smile the way men who work service jobs smile at wealthy women. He did not look away the way men who know their place are supposed to look away. He just looked. Steady. Unhurried, like he had all the time in the world and had decided to spend some of it on her. Then the second one looked up. Same eyes. Green, she would discover later. The specific shade of green that exists at the bottom of shallow Caribbean water where the sand is white and the light comes through clean. Dominique took a sip of her cold coffee and told herself she was simply noting an unusual situation. Twins working the same yacht. That was all. She was a married woman on her way to a second honeymoon, or whatever Gerald was calling this trip, and she was simply noting an unusual professional situation. She turned around and walked back to the parking lot to wait for her husband. His name was Caden, the one who had looked at her first. She learned this when Gerald made the introductions with the distracted efficiency of a man who considers staff introductions a formality he has agreed to perform, rather than an actual social interaction. Gerald pointed at things and said names, and Dominique shook hands and tried to pay attention, but the problem was that when Caden shook her hand, he held it for exactly 1 second longer than strictly necessary. And in that 1 second, something rearranged itself in her chest that she did not have a name for yet. The other one was Cody. His handshake was professional, warm, friendly in a way that felt genuine rather than performed. He had the easy smile of someone who liked people as a general policy. Where Caden seemed to take up space with a kind of quiet intensity, Cody took up space the way sunlight does, filling whatever he walked into without demanding anything in return. They were the boat's deck crew, 2 of 4 staff Gerald had hired through some agency that specialized in crewing luxury vessels. For people who wanted the experience of sailing without the inconvenience of actually knowing how to sail. The captain was a weathered Cuban man named Ramirez, who had been navigating these waters for 30 years and who clearly found Gerald mildly insufferable but was professional enough to keep it to a slight tightening around his eyes. The 4th crew member was a woman named Sophia, who handled provisioning and interior maintenance with the cheerful competence of someone who genuinely loved her work. Gerald barely registered any of them as human beings. That was simply Gerald's way. He moved through the world surrounded by people he had hired to make his life easier, and he appreciated them the way he appreciated his car's navigation system. Useful, replaceable, not worth knowing personally. Dominique had spent 3 years trying not to notice this about him. She was not always successful. The Gerald III left Marina Bay Harbor at 11 in the morning on a Thursday, slipping out past the channel markers into open water while Miami's skyline burned white and silver in the July heat behind them. Dominique stood at the stern and watched the city get smaller, and she felt the complicated mixture of relief and anxiety that had accompanied every significant departure of her adult life. The relief of leaving. The anxiety of not knowing what she was leaving toward. Gerald was already on a call in the salon below deck. She could hear the rise and fall of his voice through the open hatch. Business. Always business. The boat was barely out of the marina. She heard footsteps on the deck behind her and did not turn around. "Wind's shifting southeast this afternoon," said a voice. "We'll have a good run down to Bimini." Caden. She knew it was Caden before she turned. The voice had a particular quality to it, low and unhurried, like someone who had learned to let silence do most of the work. "How long to Bimini?" she asked. 4 hours. Maybe 3.5 if the wind cooperates. He came to stand at the stern rail beside her, not close, maintaining the professional distance that the situation required, and looked out at the water with the comfortable familiarity of a man who had spent years learning to read it. "First time on the boat?" "First time on any boat this size," she said. "Gerald bought it 6 months ago. This is the maiden voyage." She paused. He named it after himself. Something moved at the corner of Caden's mouth. Not quite a smile. The suggestion of one. "I noticed." Of course he did. She said it without thinking, the way feelings that have been suppressed too long eventually find cracks to escape through, and then immediately wished she hadn't. But Caden did not capitalize on the slip, did not smile knowingly or file it away with obvious relish. He simply looked back at the water, and his silence was so easy, so free of judgment, that Dominique found herself grateful for it. "Where are you from?" she asked, because the alternative was standing next to him in silence, which felt more dangerous than conversation. "Colorado originally," he said. "My brother and I came down to the Keys about 6 years ago for a diving trip and sort of never left." "You just stayed?" "The water got us," he said simply. "Some places do that." She looked at him then, really looked, not the assessing glance she had given him on the dock. Close up, the green eyes were startling. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow, pale and thin. the kind that comes from a childhood fall and stays forever. His hands on the rail were weathered in the specific way of people who work with them, the knuckles slightly rough, the fingers capable looking. He was exactly the kind of man she had not allowed herself to look at for 3 years. She looked back at the water. "I should check on Gerald," she said. "Of course," he said. Already moving, already stepping back, giving her space with the instinct of someone who understood something about the geometry of situations, without needing to have it explained. "Let me know if you need anything, Mrs. Whitmore." She walked back toward the salon hatch and told herself the warmth moving up the back of her neck was sunburn. The first 3 days passed in the particular rhythm of luxury travel, which is to say that Gerald worked and Dominique existed decoratively in his vicinity while pretending this was a vacation. Bimini was beautiful. The water around Alice Town was the color of a dream someone was having about what water should look like, shallow and clear and impossibly blue. And Dominique spent an afternoon on the swim platform trailing her feet in it, while Gerald took calls in the air-conditioned salon below. She snorkeled above a reef that looked like a city built by artists. She drank rum drinks at a beach bar where a man played guitar badly and everyone loved him for it. She watched the sun set over the Gulf Stream and felt the specific ache of someone experiencing something beautiful entirely alone. Gerald joined her for dinner. He was good at dinner, attentive in the focused, performative way of men who have learned to schedule their charm. He asked about her day. He held her hand across the table. He was, for 2 hours, the man she had married, the one who had looked at her across a rooftop party 4 years ago like she was the only interesting thing in a room full of interesting things. Then his phone rang. He held up one finger, answered it. And just like that, she was alone at the table again, watching the stars come out over the harbor. She walked back to the Gerald III in the warm dark and found Cody sitting on the bow, his feet hanging over the side, eating an apple and looking at the same stars she had been looking at from the restaurant. He heard her footsteps and turned, and the easy smile came out immediately, the one that felt like a door being opened. "Good dinner?" he asked. "Good food," she said, which was a different answer. He seemed to understand the distinction. He moved over on the bow and she surprised herself by sitting down beside him, still in her dinner dress and looking out at the water and the scattered lights of Alice Town reflected in it. "Where's your brother?" she asked. "Caden? Down below. He's reading. He reads constantly, drives me insane." But his tone was fond. The exasperation of someone who loves the person they are exasperated by. "You met our dog yet?" "You have a dog on the boat?" "Captain Ramirez has a rule against dogs on boats," Cody said. "So technically she doesn't exist, but if she did exist, her name would be Barnacle and she would be a beagle mix who has been living in my duffel bag since Fort Lauderdale." Dominique laughed. Not the practiced social laugh that lived near the surface, but the real one. The one that came from lower down and surprised her when it arrived. Cody looked at her with an expression of pure satisfaction. "There it is," he said. "There, what is?" "The real laugh. You've been doing the polite one for 3 days." She opened her mouth and closed it again. "You've been paying attention," she said finally. He shrugged. The movement was loose-shouldered, unbothered. "It's a small boat," he said. "Hard not to notice things." Then, before she could decide whether to be uncomfortable with this, "You seem like someone who got lost somewhere." The directness of it stopped her. People in her world did not say things like that. They spoke around things in the code of money and social class, and you were supposed to understand what they meant without anyone ever saying it plainly. "That's an interesting thing to say to your employer's wife," she said. "Technically, Mr. Whitmore is my employer," Cody said. "You're a guest." He took a bite of his apple. "A guest who seems like she got lost somewhere," he said again cheerfully, as if this was simply an observation about the weather. She sat with him on the bow until almost midnight, and they talked about Colorado and Miami and what it is about certain places that make you stay. And she told him about growing up in Atlanta and how the city had changed so fast that sometimes she went back and couldn't find herself in it anymore. And Cody listened the way people listen when they are actually interested, not just waiting for their turn to talk. She went to bed feeling lighter than she had in months. She did not let herself think about why. On the fourth day, Gerald announced he needed to cut the trip short. Business, he said. Something in Singapore that required his physical presence, which Dominique had learned meant something complicated that his team couldn't handle alone, or something complicated that he didn't trust his team to handle correctly, or simply something that felt more urgent to him than his marriage. She had stopped being able to tell the difference. "I'll fly out of Nassau," he said, showing her his phone as if the email chain on it constituted an apology. "But there's no reason you can't keep going. Finish the trip. The boat's paid for, the crew is paid for. You should enjoy it." She looked at him for a long moment. He was already mentally elsewhere. She could see it in his eyes, the focused distance of a man whose attention had left the room while his body was still in it. "You want me to stay on the boat?" she said. "Alone." "You're not alone. You've got the crew." He kissed her forehead, already moving toward the cabin to pack. "You've been wanting to see the Exumas for years. Here's your chance." The plane was arranged. The bags were packed. And 3 hours after announcing this, Gerald Whitmore III was in a water taxi headed for Nassau International, his wife standing at the stern of his yacht watching him go. And Dominique Whitmore was alone on a 72-foot boat in the Bahamas with 4 people she had known for 4 days. She stood there until the water taxi was out of sight. Then she went below and changed into her swimsuit. She was going to see the Exumas. If she was going to be abandoned on a luxury yacht in the Bahamas, she was at least going to get something out of it. The Exuma chain is a string of islands that runs like a sentence down the center of the Bahamas, each one a different paragraph in the same extraordinary story. The water around them is the kind of blue that makes photographers feel inadequate. The beaches are white in the specific fine-grained way that belongs to places that have never been ordinary. The light does things there that it doesn't do anywhere else. Bending through the shallows and coming back up, transformed into something almost solid, something you want to reach out and touch. Dominique had wanted to see them since she was 22 years old, reading a travel magazine in a dentist's waiting room in Atlanta, looking at photographs of a place so beautiful it seemed made up. She stood on the forward deck of the Gerald III as they moved through the chain and felt something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Wonder. Just pure, uncomplicated wonder. "Staniel K. tomorrow," Caden said, coming up beside her. He had a chart in his hand, old school paper, the edges worn from use. "There's a shallow bay on the east side. We can anchor in 12 feet of clear water. You can see the bottom like you're looking through glass." "How many times have you been here?" she asked. "Cody and I have been doing Bahamas charters for 4 years, he said. "This stretch, probably 30 times, still gets me." He looked at the water with the uncomplicated appreciation of someone who has not grown numb to beauty just because it is familiar. It's hard to get tired of something this honest. "Honest," she repeated. "It doesn't pretend to be anything," he said. "Just water and light and sand, no agenda." She looked at him. He was watching the water with the same steady quality she had noticed on the first day, that sense of someone who did not need to fill silence with noise. "Must be nice," she said, and she heard the edge in her own voice and did not try to hide it. He turned and looked at her, and the green eyes were direct without being intrusive. "You want to talk about it, or should we keep doing the thing where we talk about the scenery?" She laughed, startled. Am I that obvious? Little bit, he said, and the smile was small but genuine, and entirely without cruelty. They sat on deck chairs in the afternoon sun, and the Gerald III moved south through water so clear you could see the shadow of the hull on the sand 20 feet below. And Dominique Whitmore talked for the first time in 3 years about what it actually felt like to be her. Not the performed version. Not the version she gave to Gerald's colleagues' wives over catered dinners. The actual version. The loneliness of being seen as a symbol rather than a person. The slow erosion of knowing your own preferences because your preferences had stopped mattering in the daily architecture of your life. The way she had graduated from Spelman with a degree in architecture, had worked for 2 years at a firm in Atlanta, had genuinely loved the work, and how that self had gotten quietly put aside somewhere in the transition to being Mrs. Gerald Whitmore III, and she wasn't entirely sure where she had left it. Caden listened the way that quiet people listen. Completely. Without interrupting, asking the occasional question that showed he had heard not just the words, but the thing underneath the words. At some point, Sophia brought them both a cold drink without being asked, and the sun moved lower and the water turned from blue to gold. And Dominique realized she had been talking for almost 2 hours, and felt simultaneously embarrassed and relieved. I don't do this, she said. Talk to strangers about personal things. I'm not a stranger anymore, he said. We've been on a boat together for 4 days. That's like knowing someone for a month in regular life. Is that a rule? It's a fact. Something about being on water compresses things. He finished his drink, set the glass down on the deck beside his chair. For what it's worth, he said, the person you're describing. The one who loved architecture and had her own preferences. She's still there. I can see her from here. The way he said it, quietly, without drama, like a simple observation rather than a line, hit her somewhere she had not expected. She looked at her hands in her lap. You're good at this, she said. At what? Making people feel like they exist. Something shifted in his expression. Not pity. Something more serious than pity and more respectful. You exist, he said. That's not something I'm manufacturing. The sun finished going down. The stars came out over the Exumas, thick and low the way they only are far from city lights. And neither of them moved from the deck chairs, and the conversation found its way to easier territory, architecture and the places he'd been, and whether Colorado ever actually felt as big as it looked in photographs. And Dominique let herself breathe all the way out for the first time in longer than she could remember. Staniel K was everything he had promised. They anchored in the bay on the east side in 12 feet of water so clear it looked like liquid glass, and Dominique spent the morning in a mask and fins drifting above a reef garden that moved and swayed and went about its business with magnificent indifference to her presence. Sergeant majors and parrotfish. A spotted eagle ray moving through the water column below her like a thought too large for words. Light coming down through the surface and shifting golden columns that made the whole reef look like the interior of a cathedral. She surfaced after an hour and floated on her back with her ears underwater, hearing the low clicks and hums of the reef, the water filtering the world down to its essentials. When she climbed back onto the swim platform, Cody was there with a towel. Well, he said. I understand now, she said, catching her breath. I understand why you stayed. He grinned with the unguarded pleasure of someone being told something they already know but love to hear confirmed. Wait until this afternoon, he said. Thunderball Grotto. You're going to lose your mind. Thunderball Grotto was a sea cave in the middle of the bay, accessible only by diving under the rock at the entrance and coming up inside into a cathedral of coral and light where holes in the ceiling let the sun come through in shifting blue and green beams that made the fish inside look like they were suspended in something supernatural. Dominique dove under 3 times before she got past the entrance, and when she finally came up inside the grotto and the light hit her, she heard herself make a sound she had no word for. Cody was already there, treading water, watching her face. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah," she agreed. They floated in the grotto for 20 minutes, not talking much, just being inside something extraordinary together. She noticed the way his shoulders were relaxed in the water. The easy confidence of someone who has been swimming in the ocean long enough that it feels like his native element. He looked younger in here than he did on deck, the professional composure gone. Just a man in the water who was happy to be exactly where he was. He is beautiful, she thought, with the simplicity of observing a fact about the world. She pushed the thought away and went back underwater. The nights on the boat changed after Gerald left. During the day, things were professional. The crew had its rhythms, and Dominique fell into them naturally enough. But evenings, when the anchor was set, and the dinner dishes were cleared and the Bahamas sky went enormous and violet and then black overhead, the professional structure loosened into something easier. And sometimes she found herself on deck with one or both of the twins talking about whatever direction the conversation wanted to go. With Cody, it was easy and warm. He told stories the way people who are good at parties tell stories, with timing and humor and the instinct for when to slow down and when to speed up. He made her laugh. He treated her like a person he liked rather than a client's wife, and the distinction was more nourishing than she would have predicted. With Caden, it was different. There was more silence. More of the thing that had happened on the first day, that quality of compression, like the important things were happening underneath the conversation rather than inside it. He would say something plain and direct, and it would land like it had more weight than the words should carry. She found herself replaying things he had said after she went to bed, turning them over. On the 5th night, she couldn't sleep. 2 in the morning, the boat moving gently on its anchor in the harbor at Black Point. The sky outside the porthole above her bunk showing the particular deep blue that precedes dawn. She went up on deck in her sleeping clothes, the expensive silk shorts and tank top that she'd packed as a concession to the possibility that Gerald might want to pretend they had a normal marriage. And she sat on the bow with her knees up and her back against the anchor windlass, and looked at the water. She heard footsteps, knew before she turned that it was Caden. He was barefoot in shorts and a faded t-shirt, his hair pushed back, looking like someone who had also not been sleeping. He stopped when he saw her, gave her the choice. "You don't have to go," she said. He sat down, not close, the right distance for 2 in the morning on the bow of a boat in the dark. "You always up this late?" he asked. "Never," she said. "You?" "Not usually." He looked at the water, a pause. "Thinking. About everything," she said. "About nothing useful." She paused. "About the fact that I'm 34 years old and I'm sitting on my husband's boat in one of the most beautiful places on earth, and the most alive I've felt in 3 years was yesterday afternoon in a sea cave with a man I didn't know existed a week ago." She had not meant to say that. It came out the way the earlier thing had come out, through a crack. Caden was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do with that?" he asked. "I have no idea," she said honestly. The water moved below them. Somewhere distant, a bird made a sound that belonged to a different hour, something nocturnal and content. The boat shifted on its anchor line. The stars overhead were so thick they seemed like a crowd. "Dominique," he said, and it was the first time he had used her name. Just her name without the Mrs. Whitmore, and something about that registered differently than it should have. "Don't," she said. Don't what? I haven't said anything yet. Don't say whatever sensible thing you're about to say, she said. I know what the sensible thing is. I'm fully aware of the sensible thing. He was quiet again. Then, I wasn't going to say the sensible thing. She turned and looked at him. The green eyes were darker in the low light. He was looking at her with the same directness he'd had from the first moment on the dock, that quality of someone who has decided to be honest rather than careful. Then what were you going to say? She asked. That you deserve to feel alive, he said. All the time, not just in sea caves. Something in her chest did the rearranging thing again, more significant this time. She looked back at the water, her hands in her lap, the silk of her sleeping shorts against her legs, the warm Bahamas air moving over her skin. This is the part where I should go back to bed, she said. Probably, he agreed. Neither of them moved. The stars did what stars do at 2 a.m. in the middle of the Bahamas, which is shine with the specific intensity of things that do not concern themselves with human complications. What would you do? She asked. If you were me? He considered this with the seriousness it deserved. I'd figure out who I was before I ended up here, he said, and I'd make sure she was still somewhere I could find her. And if she'd been misplaced for a long time? She's not misplaced, he said. I told you I can see her from here. She turned and looked at him again, and the distance between them was the kind of distance that is also a question. Caden, she said. Yeah, he said, and the boat rocked gently on the midnight water, and the stars went on shining. And the next moment was the kind of next moment that changes the shape of everything that comes after it. She did not remember who moved first. Later she would think about this and the memory would be soft at the edges, the way the really significant memories tend to be, like the mind knows they are important enough to protect from over-examination. What she remembered was the quality of the silence before, the particular density of it, charged with everything that had been building since the first afternoon on the stern deck, since the grotto, since every conversation that had been about one thing on the surface and something else entirely underneath. What she remembered was his hands, the roughness of them, the careful way they moved, like someone who understood the value of taking time. Not Gerald's practiced precision. Something more fundamental than that. Something that felt less like performance and more like attention. What she remembered was the sound of the water. The boat moved on its anchor. The Bahamas night did what Bahamas nights do. The stars watched with the indifferent beauty of things that have no opinion about human hearts. She was not sure how long they sat there before the world as it had been arranged came back. The next morning was different, not awkward. She had expected awkward. Caden at breakfast with the particular careful friendliness of a man trying to act normal, the stilted professional distance, the pretending. Instead, he looked at her across the cockpit table over coffee and said, "Good morning," with the same directness he'd had from the beginning, and she said it back, and that was that. Sophia brought fruit and the particular Bahamian eggs she had figured out they both liked, and Captain Ramirez discussed the day's plan. And Cody told a story about something Barnacle, the technically non-existent beagle, had done in the night that made everyone at the table laugh. And the morning was just the morning, except that something in the quality of how Caden looked at her had changed. Not more or less professional. Something in the register. Like a door that had been standing slightly ajar had now been opened all the way. And everyone was acknowledging this without making anything of it. She helped Sophia with the breakfast dishes, which was not a thing that Mrs. Gerald Whitmore III did on boats, and Sophia accepted this without comment. And they worked in the small galley kitchen together. The twins have been on a lot of charters, Sophia said, handing her a bowl to dry. I imagine so. I've worked with them for 2 seasons. Sophia was efficient, economical with her movements, and equally economical with her meaning. They're good men. Both of them. The genuine kind. Dominique did not say anything. Rare thing, Sophia said, putting a plate away. The genuine kind. Dominique finished drying the bowl. Sophia, she said. Mrs. Whitmore, Sophia said pleasantly. You can call me Dominique. Sophia looked at her. Something in the older woman's expression settled. All right, she said. Cody found out in the way that people who know each other very well find out about things without being told. He was on the bow coiling line in the afternoon, and Dominique was walking forward to get a better angle on a pelican she was trying to photograph with her phone. And he looked up at her and then looked toward the cockpit where Caden was doing something with the chart, and then back at her, and she watched the understanding move through his expression like weather. She stopped walking. Don't make it weird, she said. I'm not making anything, he said, resuming the line coiling with complete tranquility. I'm literally just coiling this line. Cody, I'm coiling a line, he said. It's a boat. Lines need coiling. She stifled a laugh. He glanced up and his expression was complex, amused, cautious, genuinely fond. Something else she couldn't name. He's a good man, Cody said quietly. All the lightness gone. He's the best man I know and I'm related to him, so that means something. I know, she said, and you're in a complicated situation. I know that too. He looked at her for a long moment. Okay, he said, and went back to the line. Go take your pelican picture. She took the pelican picture. It was an excellent picture. That evening they anchored in a cove off an uninhabited island in the southern Exumas, a place where the only signs of human presence were some bleached driftwood on the beach and the anchor light of a boat in the next cove over, visible around the headland. Captain Ramirez and Sophia went ashore in the dinghy to collect some wood for the beach fire Ramirez had announced he was building because it was that kind of night. Cody followed them, carrying the cooler with an elaborate casualness that fooled no one. Dominique and Caden were alone on the boat. She was standing at the stern watching the dinghy cross the short distance to the beach when he came up behind her. Not touching, just close enough that she could feel the warmth of him against the evening air. This is the most complicated thing I've done in a long time, she said. Me too, he said. For what it's worth. She turned around. The evening was doing what evenings in the southern Bahamas do. Going golden and then rose and then violet in a slow procession of colors that seemed personally designed to undermine rational thought. The water behind him was still. The beach beyond that was white. The driftwood fire Ramirez was building was putting up a small column of smoke that bent south in the light breeze. I'm still married, she said. I know, he said. And I don't know what this is. I know that too, he said. Neither do I. He paused. Does that need to be solved right now? She considered this. No, she said. I don't think it does. He reached out and touched her face, just the backs of his fingers light against her cheek. And the touch was different from the night before in the same way that daylight is different from starlight. More visible, more deliberate, a choice made in full light rather than under cover of darkness. She closed her eyes. I have been thinking about things I had stopped thinking about, she said, for years, because they seemed irrelevant, because they didn't fit into the life I'd ended up with. She opened her eyes. I don't know what to do about that. You don't have to do anything about it right now, he said. Right now there's just this. This, she agreed. The boat moved in the slight swell of the cove. The fire on the beach was building now, and the sound of Cody's laughter carried across the water, easy and free. The stars were beginning one by one to make themselves known in the paling sky. She put her hand on his chest, felt the steadiness of his heartbeat under her palm, and let herself be in one moment without trying to understand the next one. She woke before dawn. The porthole showed a sky the color of a bruised peach, the first pale light feeling its way across the horizon. The boat moved gently. Below her, through the hull, she could hear the small sounds of water against fiberglass. She lay still and thought about what she had done and found that she was not afraid of it the way she had expected to be. What she felt instead was the particular clarity that comes after a period of prolonged confusion. Not resolution. She had not resolved anything. Her marriage was still what it was. Her life was still structured the way it was structured. The Gerald III was still named the Gerald III. But something that had been sealed was open now, and the air moving through it felt necessary. She got up carefully and went up on deck. Caden was there, of course he was. On watch, technically, sitting in the cockpit with the tablet that showed their anchor position and the surrounding chart. A mug of coffee on the cockpit table beside him. He heard her footsteps and looked up. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "Didn't try yet," he said. He poured from the carafe he'd had ready, handed her a mug. She sat across from him in the cockpit and wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at the sky going through its transformation. Pink now, the bruised peach brightening, the horizon sharpening. "What happens when the trip ends?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to happen?" "I want to know who I am outside of being Gerald's wife," she said. "I've wanted that for a long time. I just couldn't see it clearly until this week." She looked at him. "You have something to do with that." "You would have seen it eventually," he said. "You're not the kind of person who stays lost forever." "How do you know that?" "Because you're asking the question," he said. "People who stay lost stop asking." The sun started to come up. The water around the boat went from dark to luminous, that extraordinary Exuma's light returning with the day, filling the cove with a blue that seemed lit from underneath. "I'm going to talk to Gerald when I get back," she said. "We need to have a real conversation, the kind we haven't been having." She paused. "I don't know what happens after that." "Okay," he said. "That's all you're going to say? What do you want me to say?" The green eyes were steady. "I don't know," she admitted. "Then I'll say this," he said. "Whatever you figure out about your life when you get back, you should know that you're not invisible. You've never been invisible. The people who made you feel that way were just not paying attention." She looked at him across the cockpit table in the early morning light. "Caden?" she said. "Yeah." "Thank you," she said. He nodded. Simple, no more than the situation required. They watched the sun finish coming up, the cove filled with gold. Somewhere on the island behind them, a bird started in with the morning, and then another, and then the whole warm Bahamian morning was underway. The last 4 days of the trip moved differently than the first. Slower, more deliberate. The way time moves when you are aware of it running out. Dominique had stopped pretending to herself that this was anything other than what it was. Not a crisis, not a mistake to be managed or a complication to be minimized. Something real, happening in real time. To a real woman who had spent 3 years being decorative and was only now remembering that she had a self that existed independently of her function. That self, it turned out, liked mornings on deck with strong coffee and the sound of water. She liked snorkeling above things that didn't know she existed and were magnificent anyway. She liked conversations that went somewhere honest. She liked the feeling of the sun on her shoulders without worrying about what it was doing to her complexion. She also, it turned out, liked Caden Hayes from Colorado, who read constantly and drove his brother insane and looked at her like she was worth the full weight of his attention. This was information she was going to have to do something with. Just not today. Today they were sailing to the southern tip of the Exuma chain, a stretch of water and island that Captain Ramirez had been promising since Staniel K, describing it in his economical way as the best of it. The best of what, he had declined to specify. He seemed to feel this would become evident. It did. Great Exuma rose out of the sea on the port side as the Gerald III came south through the chain, and Dominique stood at the bow and watched it arrive with the feeling of someone receiving a gift they had not expected. The town of Georgetown sat on a hill above Elizabeth Harbor, the harbor itself a wide, protected anchorage full of boats from everywhere, sailboats and motor yachts and old wooden sloops from Nassau, and a remarkable number of vessels that looked like they had been here so long they had become part of the geography. The town was pastel and low-built and looked like it had been designed by someone who understood that beauty does not require scale. They anchored in the harbor in the late afternoon, and the light off the water lit everything gold. "This is where I'd stay," Cody said, coming up beside her, "if I ever stopped moving. Right here." "You're not a staying person," she said. "No," he agreed, "but if I were, it'd be here." He paused. "What about you, if you could be anywhere?" She thought about this. The honest version of it, not the social answer. "I don't know yet," she said. "I'm still figuring out what I like. Turns out I got out of the habit." He looked at her sideways. "You got back into it pretty fast." "You and your brother have something to do with that," she said. He was quiet for a moment, the easy brightness subdued slightly. "You know it's more than just Caden, right?" he said. "I mean, what he's doing for you, seeing you clearly, that's real. That's genuinely him. He doesn't do that for everyone." "I know," she said. "I just want to make sure you know," he said. "Because you deserve to be seen clearly. And I also want you to know that whatever happens on the other end of this trip, you should hold on to the part of this that's about you figuring yourself out. Don't let that get mixed up with the rest of it." She turned and looked at him. The lightness was still there underneath, but the thing on top of it right now was something more careful. A brother looking out for two people at once. "You're a good man, Cody Hayes," she said. He shrugged with elaborate modesty. "I'm okay," he said. "Caden's the good one. I'm the fun one." She laughed, the real laugh. He looked satisfied. Inerlum. Georgetown had a restaurant on the harbor that served fish so fresh it seemed like a philosophical statement about what food was supposed to be. And that evening Ramirez declared a crew dinner ashore, which Dominique understood to be his way of marking the end of the voyage. 4 days still remaining, but the character of it shifting now toward conclusion. They went in the dinghy, the 5 of them. Barnacle, the technically non-existent beagle, left aboard with instructions to remain invisible. And they sat at a long table on the restaurant's porch with the harbor spread out before them, going pink and then purple in the evening. And they ate and drank, and Ramirez told stories about the 30 years of these waters in a low, unhurried voice that made everything he described feel like it had taken place in a world parallel to the ordinary one, brighter and more saturated, which Dominique suspected was simply accurate. Sophia talked about her daughter in Nassau who wanted to study marine biology. And Dominique found herself genuinely engaged, asking questions and listening to the answers with an interest that had nothing performed about it. "This is also who I am," she thought, "the person who gets interested in people." Gerald had a way of making her feel like being interested in people was somehow inefficient. Cody ordered a round of rum drinks with names that required a glossary and made everyone attempt to explain them and failed. And the table was loud with laughter for a few minutes in the way that tables full of people who like each other get loud. Caden beside her was quieter than the others. Not withdrawn, just more interior the way he was, His shoulder was against hers in the way that two people sit when they have been close and are comfortable being close, and the contact was easy and warm, and she was aware of it without making anything of it. Under the table, his hand found hers. She did not look at him. She turned her palm up and folded her fingers around his and kept listening to Cody explain the difference between two rum drinks that appeared to have identical ingredients. The harbor went dark. The lights of the other boats reflected in the water. Someone at another table was playing guitar softly, better than the man in Bimini, though she would have smiled equally at either. She sat in the warm Bahamian night with her hand folded around a man's she had known for 10 days and felt, underneath everything complicated, the simple, steady pulse of being alive and present and real. 3 days out from Nassau on the return trip. The wind was steady and from the southeast, and Ramirez had the sails up. The Gerald III moving through the water on a long, easy reach that required minimal adjustment and maximal appreciation. The boat felt alive in a way it didn't under engine, responsive and purposeful, leaning slightly into the wind with an urgency that felt like intention. Dominique had been spending time in the cockpit learning the basics. Not at Gerald's encouragement, obviously. At her own. She had asked Ramirez to show her, and he had done so with the gravity of a man passing on something he considered sacred. And she had found that she had a natural feel for the helm, the instinct for what the boat was telling her through the wheel and how to respond. Caden was on deck, working. She watched him move around the rigging with the ease of long practice, checking things, adjusting things, the competence of it quiet and entirely without performance. He glanced back at her at the helm, and the green eyes crinkled at the corners. "You're a natural," he said. "I'm barely keeping it straight," she said. "You're keeping it straight," he said. "Trust what the boat's telling you." She thought this was also good life advice and did not say so. Cody appeared from below with sandwiches, distributed them with the cheerful efficiency he brought to everything, and climbed up onto the cabin top to eat in the sun. He looked like an advertisement for something uncomplicated and good. She thought that in another life, in a different set of circumstances, she could have fallen entirely differently with equal ease. The Hayes twins were, it turned out, exactly as dangerous as their first impression had suggested, just not in the way she would have predicted. The danger wasn't recklessness or irresponsibility. It was the opposite. It was the danger of men who were exactly what they appeared to be, who did not have a gap between the surface and the interior, who looked at you the same way in the morning as they had the night before. That was rarer than recklessness. She was only now understanding how rare. 2 days out. They had stopped for the night at an anchorage off a small quay whose name she had not written down and would probably never find on a map again. The kind of place that exists in its own world, the kind that makes you understand why people become sailors. She and Caden went ashore in the kayak late in the afternoon, just the two of them, paddling in through the shore break to a beach that was theirs alone for the hour. The sand so white it hurt to look at in direct sun and cool and fine underfoot in the shade of the tree line. They walked the length of the beach without talking much. She picked up shells and looked at them and put them back. He found a piece of sea glass and handed it to her, blue-green, frosted by time in the water into something milky and soft. "Keep it," he said. She held it in her palm. It caught the light. "I've been thinking about what I said," she told him, "about talking to Gerald." "Okay," he said. "I've been thinking about it for a while. Not just since this trip. The trip made me able to say it." She looked at the sea glass. "I don't think I've been happy for a long time. I think I convinced myself that happiness was beside the point, that I'd made a choice, and the adult thing was to live with the choice and not complain. That's not adulthood," he said. "That's just surrender. I know that now." They had reached the end of the beach. The quay rose behind them in low scrub and the sea stretched ahead of them unbroken to the horizon. "I don't know what's on the other side of that conversation," she said. "I don't know what my life looks like afterward." "What do you want it to look like?" he asked. She thought about the architecture degree, the 2 years at the firm in Atlanta, the way she had loved looking at a space and seeing its possibilities, the way a building could change what happened inside people's lives just by how it was arranged. She thought about the woman in the dentist's office at 22 reading about the exumas. She thought about the real laugh that Cody had noticed was missing. "I want it to look like something I built myself," she said. He nodded. The slow, serious nod of a man who understands that this is not nothing. "Then build it," he said. She looked at him, barefoot in the sand, the sea glass in her hand, the end-of-day light making everything in this small quay look like something held at just the right angle. "Are you going to be in it?" she asked, the question she had been not asking for a week. He was quiet for a moment. The honest kind of quiet where the answer is being considered rather than managed. "I don't know what that looks like," he said. "I live on boats. I don't have a fixed address. My life is not configured for the conventional version of anything." He paused. "But I know that what's happened this week is real. And I know that it would be dishonest to pretend I'm going to go back to doing charters and forget about you." "That's not an answer," she said. "It's the most honest thing I can give you right now," he said, "which is better than an answer I can't keep." She looked at the sea glass, turned it over. The frosted surface had caught the warmth of her hand. "Okay," she said. He reached over and she let him take her hand, the one without the sea glass, and they stood at the end of the beach looking at the horizon for a while. And it was not resolved and it was not simple, and it was real in a way that nothing in her life had felt real for longer than she could easily name. "Thank you for being honest," she said. "Always," he said, like it was the only option. The last night. Nassau Harbor in the morning, and then the water taxi, and then the airport, and then Miami, and the penthouse, and the life she was going to have to figure out what to do with. She sat on the bow in the dark, which had become her place on this boat, and looked at the sky. They were anchored off New Providence, the lights of Nassau visible on the horizon, the night soft and warm and full of the smell of the ocean. She heard both sets of footsteps this time. They sat down on either side of her, Caden on her left and Cody on her right, and for a moment nobody said anything, the three of them looking at the sky together. "Last night," Cody said. "Last night," she agreed. "How are you feeling?" he asked. She thought about it, the honest accounting. "Scared," she said, "clearer than I've been in years. Sad about leaving, scared about what happens next." She paused. "Grateful." "Yeah?" Cody said. "You two made me remember something I'd put down," she said. "Both of you in different ways. I wasn't expecting that to happen on this trip." "To be fair," Cody said, "you weren't expecting to be here alone." "No," she said, "but I think maybe I needed to be." Caden put his arm around her, easy, unhurried the way all his gestures were. She leaned into it slightly. Cody handed her a drink from somewhere, one of the rum things from Georgetown that still didn't have a comprehensible name, and she took it and the three of them sat on the bow of the Gerald III on the last night and talked about nothing important and some things that were, and the stars did their work overhead. At some point Cody fell asleep sitting up, which he apparently did regularly, a fact that Caden confirmed with the tone of someone who has given up being surprised by it. She and Caden sat in the quiet and watched the lights of Nassau on the horizon. "I don't know what comes next," she said for what felt like the 10th time. "No," he said, "but you know what you want. That's different from where you were a week ago." "A week ago I was standing on a dock in Miami watching two identical strangers load provisions onto my husband's boat," she said. My life was a different shape. Shapes change, he said. She turned and looked at him in the low light. Memorizing, she realized. She was memorizing his face with the specific attention you give to something you are afraid of losing. He looked back. Can I find you? She asked. After I figure out what my life is. Can I find you? I'll make sure of it, he said. She nodded, looked back at the horizon. He pressed a kiss to her temple, quiet and warm, the most tender thing he had done, and something about its gentleness undid something in her chest completely. She took a slow breath. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Cody snored lightly between them. The boat rocked. The stars went on doing what stars do. Nassau glittered on the horizon like a promise or a warning, or simply a city full of people who had no idea that out here on the water in the dark, a woman had found herself again. Nassau was loud after 2 weeks of the southern islands. The water taxi was efficient and impersonal. The port was full of noise and purpose and the general urgency of a city going about its business. Dominique watched it arrive from the stern as they came in through the channel, and she felt the return like a weather change, the soft, particular atmosphere of the boat giving way to something harder and more complicated. Ramirez docked with the quiet authority of 30 years, and the crew began the business of making the boat fast and preparing for disembarkation. Sophia helped her carry her bags to the dock. Captain Ramirez shook her hand with both of his and said something in Spanish she didn't catch, but whose warmth was unmistakable. Cody hugged her. Cody, not a formal handshake, a real hug, the kind that lasts long enough to mean something. Do the thing you said you were going to do, he said into her ear. Don't talk yourself out of it when you get back. I won't, she said. I'll believe it when I hear, he said. But his eyes were warm. She turned to Caden last. He was standing at the edge of the dock, and in the bright Nassau morning light he looked exactly like what he was. A man who spent his life on water, competent and unhurried and completely himself. The person she was going back to would have looked at him and seen a boat hand. She looked at him and saw someone who had, without intending to and without asking anything in return, changed the shape of her understanding of what she deserved. She stepped forward and put her arms around him, and he held her with the careful attention she had come to understand was simply how he was with things he cared about. Thank you, she said quietly. You did the work, he said. I just paid attention. She pulled back and looked at him, green eyes steady in the morning light. Find me, she said. Count on it, he said. She picked up her bag. She walked up the dock and through the port and out into the Nassau morning. And the life she was going to figure out was waiting for her somewhere in the direction of home. And she walked toward it with the particular forward lean of a woman who has remembered that she is capable of choosing her own direction. The sea glass was in her jacket pocket. She could feel the smooth, frosted weight of it. She did not look back. That was also a choice. 3 months later. The firm was small. 4 architects, 2 junior associates, 1 project manager who did the work of 3 people and knew it. It occupied the 2nd floor of a building in Midtown Miami that had good bones and terrible lighting, which the senior partner described as ironic and which Dominique had quietly fixed in her first week by rearranging the window coverings. She had noticed things like that since she was 22 years old. She had simply stopped noticing that she noticed. The divorce had been what divorces are when one party has more lawyers than the other party has feelings for the marriage. Complicated in the legal sense, cleaner in the emotional one. Gerald had been surprised and then practical, which was entirely consistent with who he was. She had not expected grief from him and had not received it, and what she felt about that had taken some months to settle into something that was not pain exactly, but was not nothing. She was fine. She was more than fine. She was, on most mornings, something approaching herself. She was in the office on a Thursday afternoon in October, working through the plans for a residential project in Coral Gables when her phone showed a number she had not saved but recognized. She set down her pencil, looked at the phone, picked it up. "You found me fast," she said. "I told you I would," said Caden Hayes from wherever he was, which turned out to be Key West, which was 3.5 hours away, which was no distance at all. "How long are you in Key West?" she asked. "End of charter season," he said. 3 weeks. Then we're taking the boat to dry dock in Fort Lauderdale." "Fort Lauderdale," she said. "Fort Lauderdale," he agreed. She looked at the Coral Gables plans on her desk. The site had a southern exposure and a slope she'd been trying to work with rather than against, and it was the most interesting problem she'd had in months. "I have a project I'm working on," she said. "It might be done by the time you get to Fort Lauderdale. Then I'll wait," he said. She smiled. Outside the window, Miami went about its business in the October afternoon sun. Inside the small office, the other architects worked at their desks and the project manager navigated her 3 people's worth of work with cheerful expertise, and a woman who had recently rediscovered her own name sat with the phone at her ear. "Cody okay?" she asked. "Cody is infuriating and excellent and currently attempting to convince Captain Ramirez to let Barnacle become an official crew member," Caden said. "So, normal," she laughed. "The real one." 3 weeks, she said. 3 weeks, he said. She could hear the water behind his voice. She would probably always be able to hear the water behind his voice. She did not mind this at all. She drove to Fort Lauderdale on a Friday afternoon in November, taking I-95 south with the windows down, and a playlist she had made herself for the first time in 3 years. Music she actually liked rather than music appropriate to being Gerald Whitmore's wife. The marina where the boat was laid up for dry dock was north of downtown, functional and working rather than glamorous, full of boats in various states of maintenance and the particular smell of marine epoxy and salt water that she had apparently developed a complicated emotional response to without noticing. She found the Gerald III by its name on the dock. The name that had once struck her as the definitive statement of the man she had married looked different to her now. Just a name. Letters on a hull. The boat beneath them was its own thing, separate from what it had been called. Caden was waiting on the dock. He looked exactly the same, which she had expected and which still surprised her. She got out of the car, and they stood for a moment on the dock with the boat behind him and the afternoon sun doing its work and 3 months of phone calls and texts that had built something careful and real between them and all of the complicated months between Nassau and this moment present in the air. Then she crossed the dock and he met her halfway, and they held on to each other for a moment that was not hurried, not performed, not managed. "Hello," she said into his shoulder. "Hello," he said into her hair. Somewhere on the boat, a beagle made a sound of general approval. "Barnacle made it official crew?" she asked. "Captain Ramirez officially knows about Barnacle now," Caden said. "They've reached a diplomatic understanding." She laughed. "The real one." He pulled back to look at her, and the green eyes did the thing she had spent 3 months trying not to think about too much, which was see her clearly in the way that she had spent 3 years being unseen. "You look different," he said. "Good different or bad different?" she asked. "Like yourself," he said. "Which is good." She looked at him. "I'm still figuring things out," she said. "Me too," he said. "This is complicated," she said. "Yes," he said. "Worth it?" She thought about the sea glass in the dish on her nightstand where she had put it the day she moved into the midtown apartment that she had chosen herself and furnished slowly with things she actually liked. She thought about the Coral Gables project, the slope she had finally found the right answer for. She thought about the woman at 22 in the dentist's office looking at photographs of a place that seemed made up. She thought about a sea cave full of impossible light and the sound it made when you surfaced inside it. "Yes," she said. He smiled. Not the small cautious one from the boat. The full version, which she had not seen many times and which, it turned out, was worth the wait. She took his hand. They walked down the dock toward whatever came next, which was unknown and imperfect and entirely their own. And the afternoon sun fell across the water in long golden ribbons exactly the way it had on the morning when she had first stood on a dock in Miami and felt the particular emptiness of a woman who had everything and nothing at the same time. The water glittered. She did not feel empty.